people said this is the public town square of where discourse happens. This is where journalists look to stick their finger in the air and tell you where the wind is blowing, even though it's not blowing anywhere near where they say it's blowing, because Twitter is full of just people who like to be on Twitter, which is these elitist weirdo types. Governments are playing a very, very weird game where they're like, yeah, we can suppress as much as we like because everyone looks to Twitter as where to get news and information and truth from. That is why it's a problem. And it's making people crazy at the same time.
Knowledge and ignorance.
Welcome. Knowledge and ignorance. I expect it's episode 28, unless something happened. Twitter's got to go. Bye-bye. Yeah, it's got to go. Now, I'm not one of these people that's well into, cancelling things, censorship, banning. I do believe that people should be able to make their own decisions and mistakes and deal with the consequences of those decisions and mistakes. I think responsibility has been taken away from us. Way too much responsibility has been taken away from us, and therefore way too much freedom has been taken away from us. But there is a point that the government, the role of MPs was supposed to be to represent the people against the powerful. The factory workers and the miners, to go up against the very rich people that held their lives in their hands. They needed a representative that wasn't a landowner or a duke or a lord or a king or whatever. That was the job of MPs. Whereas now MPs are, of course, micromanagers whose kind of sole purpose, in line with the police and the security services, is to just keep you sedated so you don't upset anybody, so everything can just keep ticking over the way they like it. So, Amazon can keep making money. I'm just being facetious about that bit. But, that's the role of the MP has been changed, and therefore, Twitter and outrage culture suits the modern MP, because the modern MP it doesn't suit them, I suppose. It's a really bad mix of a mindset and a culture that just wants everyone to just be okay. Let's not have any trouble, and more people being outraged and upset on Twitter specifically, and therefore they're trying to keep everything. They're trying to weigh everything down, so shut everything down, because everything's upsetting for people and it's upsetting the status quo. It's like, Jesus, we just need everyone to be sedated. But I know I've gone off a bit of a tangent, but the point is the MPs were supposed to serve us, and therefore there are things and laws that are good. There are things that have been banned and made illegal that should be, because it's to protect the people. The thing is, you can argue for and against something, and if you're very good, what was I saying? Very good. If you're very good at arguing, you can argue the most batshit crazy point across. Okay, it doesn't mean you're right. You can have all the greatest facts in the world that support something, but you'll be terrible at putting across your argument. You will lose the argument, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. The point is, we can make decisions based on facts, on evidence that says this is bad, this is really bad, we don't need this, we can do without it. I think Twitter's one of those things. Like, look, asbestos. There was an asbestos factory somewhere. It's like, you're not taking away my asbestos, that's me little bread and butter. And it's like, this asbestos is killing mans. It's terrible. Look how cancer-ridden Grandad is. Look, his face has fallen off. You want to keep this asbestos factory open so everyone dies? But it's been me family for 100 years making asbestos. You won't take me asbestos away from me. I love it. Asbestos is bad. It's banned. Good. Does anyone miss asbestos? Is there any sort of nostalgia parties for asbestos? I go, do you remember asbestos? How good was that? Yo, I'm having a throwback Friday asbestos party. We're going to hoof asbestos. No one misses asbestos, man. Opioids. All right? Bad. They're bad. There's a reason why you should only be prescribed them by, a thoroughly corrupt doctor. But it's bad, like crack. I know there's these people who saying, all drugs should be decriminalised and legalised and blah, 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 blah. And they say crack's just cocaine. You never smoke crack, clearly. It ain't just cocaine, okay? Cocaine, that could be legal. It's fine. It's cocaine. What is cocaine? Not a lot. Crack, no. Okay? Murder, I think we're all cool with murder being illegal. Murder's not too cool, although obviously the police and the army can murder people with impunity. So that needs sorting out, doesn't it? But we can agree to these things. If you're like, there's some culture, we love kidnapping toddlers and drowning them. You'd be like, that's not a good thing to do, is it? We're going to ban that. No, but we really enjoy it. We get a kick out of it. We love it. Well, no, we're banning it, I'm afraid. Why? Because it's dud. Here's the statistics that say this is bad. Here, look at the data. Look at the devastation your hobby causes. I see. And Twitter is bad. Social media, in general, is pretty bad for mental health. I can even remember 10 years ago living with a Sicilian, and he was telling me about how in his country, they had Facebook rehab centers. This was like 2009, 2010. They also had rehab centers in Korea for people addicted to social media. That's 10 years ago. They already knew that there was some bad shit going on. If anything that you do has a rehab center associated with it, then you can safely say there's probably some bad shit about this. Booze. I mean, there's cigarettes. There's no rehab centers for cigarettes as far as I can see. I could really do with one. That would be super cool. Can someone open one, please? That'd be great. So if there's a rehab center associated with something, it's pretty bad. Now, we could talk about banning all social media. I mean, Facebook, Instagram, these platforms just appeal to the most narcissistic and worst aspects of humanity. It's bred this culture of clickbait, obviously, because your attention span is so small. It's just, Facebook is just a wall of shit. There is nothing on Facebook that's good. This is why you should never. I've used Facebook ads before for business, but it's like it's just a wall of plop. Why would you want to contribute to that wall of plop? I don't know. Is a wall of plop. Instagram, people's problems with Instagram. I remember a few years ago they were like, "Oh, Instagram's promoting self-harming." It's like, calm down. It's promoting self-love, if anything. I don't know about the self-hatred that's promoted on Instagram. It's purely just look at my ass. My shop link in bio. The vacuous narcissistic symptom of modern culture. It's a hell of a lot of it's to do with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. But the thing is about Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, fucking Bebo, LinkedIn, right? Tumblr, and the new ones, Minds or Gab or Parley, or I'm pretty sure Parler was supposed to be called Parley, isn't it? Or maybe I'm wrong. Or Retalk, or whatever the hell they got these days. Clubhouse. There's a big difference going on here between Twitter, because Twitter is powerful and it's held in very high esteem. No news story, there is no news cycle that relies on Twitter, that relies on Facebook or Instagram like it does on Twitter. You can have whole articles based upon tweets. Outrage over this, and it's like, they have hundreds of tweets about someone outraged over something, and half of these people have got probably like 20 or 30 followers, as if they are the benchmark of how everyone feels. It's a completely skewed version of reality. You don't get that on Facebook. No one goes, let's see what Facebook are saying about this. No one cares about what people are saying on Facebook because of because of the differences between Facebook and Twitter. I understand, but Facebook has no clout whatsoever. No one considers it to be important. Instagram, a little bit, but not really. Twitter is extremely powerful, therefore incredibly dangerous because it's toxic. It's the worst mix of things. It's toxic and powerful, and it's given too much clout. Getting that blue check mark gives people license to think they are an important human being, more important human being, should I say. They are elevated above the rest of the riffraff because of this blue check mark. No, that's not cool. Before we go right into why it should be banned and obliterated from the entire web, we have to go back and work out how, there's a reason why Twitter became what it is today and why its influence is very bad. So we're going to go into all of it. Now, I've got notes on my phone like I'm some sort of rubbish rapper. You hate when rappers write down a freestyle on their phone. So I go, I don't know, that's one of my pet hates. Because, I used to do this podcast without video. So when I used to do this bit, reading notes, it was totally fine because you couldn't see me. I mean, if you got a problem with me reading notes, I don't know why you'd have a problem with that at all. Why would that bother you? Do you know what I mean? Just get a grip. Should I have it? I should have it here, shouldn't I? There. But I got nothing to hold it there. The thing that would hold the would it be better if I held it here and sort of create the illusion that I'm not looking at the phone? Right. So if we go back to let's go back to the beginning of Twitter, okay? When Twitter came about, it's like, what is this? It's like Facebook, but with less amount of words. It's like, well, what's that all about? How can you express yourself properly with Twitter? And I remember when I opening a Twitter account because I did this nano writing thing where you write a book in a certain amount of time, which I gave up on because I was busy. And then, it was advice for writers, and this woman who's a writer, she was like, oh, yes, Twitter is the most amazing place because it really hones in your writing skills because you can only get out so much information within a tweet. Now, I don't think that's a good thing because when it comes to news, something you learn about newspapers is like broadsheets and tabloids, right? Tabloids have way smaller amount of space. I mean, they have less words to use to get points across. So it becomes very on the nose, blunt and to the point. And that has kind of reduced people's reading ages. I mean, the average reading age now is 14. That's not good. 14. So if you're ever doing any content copy that's got to be put online, you have to be speaking to a 14-year-old, even if your demographic, even if right, well, I'm aiming this at people at 45 to 54. You still have to write as if you're writing for a 14-year-old. That's not going, Pokemon, periods. Not like that. You just can't use too many words that 14-year-old will be like, ah! You can't do that. And I think that, and Twitter and so forth is kind of responsible for that. But, with a tabloid, they're very creative, tabloid press, because they have so little space to write word. They don't have as many words they can use as a broadsheet because their columns are smaller and they got to get a point across in less amount of sentences, less amount of words, so forth. Twitter is kind of like that. So it's already got a kind of a tabloid vibe to it, whereas you can't really go too deep on it because, like in a tabloid, it's like, man shot in head, murderer arrested, he is bad man. It's kind of like that. It doesn't really... It's not cool. But the thing is, with Twitter, when it came around, people like Stephen Fry were on Twitter. Old dudes, faux intellectuals and so forth. Not saying he's a faux intellectual, but journalists love it. There's a certain type of person that loves Twitter that wouldn't like Facebook. They'd stick their nose up at Facebook, but Twitter came along as very much this It's snooty Facebook, isn't it? Let's face facts. It's always been a snooty place because, as we know, a lot of journalists are incredibly elitist, even though they are terrible at their jobs. They are not very competent people anymore, but there is a war on competence now. Apparently being competent makes you some sort of evil supremacist, which is just bizarre because I quite like competence. I like people being competent. That makes me feel, better. I mean, it kind of makes sense why the whole world has been plundered into hell, because competence is now considered a bad virtue. So COVID-19, that's why we have it. That's why you're locked in your room. But anyway, so the fact is, it was a place for intellectual elitism to thrive. Okay, because they loved it. Okay, and then. You see, so that's the sort of people who are on Twitter in the first place, the original blue check marks. People going, I'm going to tweet. It was always people like, Philip Schofield tweets. People in media and stuff, they're tweeting their nonsense. Oh, here's my tweet. It was those kind of people. It wasn't the same as Facebook. It was going, oh, don't talks about I. Don't you be talking about I and not saying it to me face. Mind your own business as I write about my business on me Facebooks. That's what you get on Facebook, whereas on Twitter it's like, oh, can you work out this anagram? Oh. It's those kind of douchewads who are on Twitter. Okay. But then less intellectual sort of folks came out. I mean, Justin Bieber. There was a huge thing with Justin Bieber back in the day. Remember when Justin Bieber changed his haircut? And he lost 2 million followers or something like that. Do you remember that? He was like the most followed person on Twitter. He cut his hair and he lost millions of followers, and it was huge news. It's like he lost all these followers because of his haircut. That just sums up, I don't know, people under the age of 19. They want to allow these people to vote. I say these people, young people, they want 16-year-olds to vote. 16-year-old will stop following Justin Bieber because he changed his hair. You want to give those people that much power. So we noticed that Twitter, you can see stuff happening. There's sort of data to calculate. Because before, if Justin Bieber changed his hair and there was no Twitter, you wouldn't be able to sort of do any sort of mathematical equation on how his haircut has affected his fan base. They might they'd probably write letters back in the day, but there's no counting how many letters. Justin, you've had 4,000 disapproving letters about your haircut. No one was counting. But now you could see it in real time. You could see, wow, there's metrics to this haircut. And Twitter is very popular amongst black people, in America in particularly. I'm not sure about the UK, but there's a way more proportion of black people on Twitter than there is white people. Not overall, but like as in, you have X amount of black people, X amount of white people, but there's like more black people. You know what I'm saying. And rap Twitter, spawned Twitter beef, because this is all I knew about Twitter. Stephen Fry was on it. And then Twitter beef, which I thought was the wackest thing I've ever heard of. This is going back to 2008. People have stopped releasing diss tracks on each other. There was no follow-up to hit them up. Nothing could top it. Instead, it was just tweeting at each other. Going, yeah, fuck you, dog. Your bars is whack. And Twitter beef became a thing. And you'd see people going, hey, come read my blog. I'm up to date on all the latest Twitter beefs. Gucci Mane. I can't remember the guy's name. Oh my god. Jeezy. Gucci Mane versus Young Jeezy. You never believe what Young Buck just said to Fabulous. I don't think they ever said anything. Jim Jones is upset. He's got some Twitter beef. Tweef. And it was just, ugh. And there you could already see what Twitter was really all about. Twitter beef. Beef. Everything became about beef. But then the importance of Twitter was elevated kind of around the Arab Spring, basically. Even though, like, a lot of the Arab Spring, a lot of the things that happened during it, like the protests and all the things during the Arab Spring. A lot of it was coordinated on Facebook as well. But it was Twitter where they kind of made a big deal out of it because the hashtag type things. Then you started seeing that people like social media can change the world. Well, no, it can spark something to happen, but since the Arab Spring, everything is a bigger mess. So the Arab Spring was a colossal failure, let's face facts. Slavery has returned to Libya. Syria has been at civil war for 11, 12 years. Whoever's in charge in Egypt isn't cool. Nothing great has happened since the Arab Spring, has it? It was a bit crap. But then hashtags, the importance of hashtags. These are movements of activism. Hashtags, changing the world. I've got some here. Black Lives Matter. Do you remember when that was just a hashtag? Ice Bucket Challenge. Bring back our girls. Admittedly, they never brought them back. But the sentiment was there. Je suis Charlie. Hashtags now have sort of gone, but don't forget there was a point when you could read article after article about how amazing these hashtags were and how they are changing the world for the better and all this stuff. The importance of Twitter was just going up and up and up and up and up. Now you have an ecosystem where all journalists look to Twitter because they love Twitter and they think Twitter's so damn important because it's been occupied by the intellectual elite since its inception. This is, people have been born and died since. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is going back to 2007? Maybe before, 2006, 2005? It's been inhabited by the intellectual elite. Not like YouTube and Facebook, which has Zoella and dapper laughs. That's inhabited by morons. Twitter's inhabited by the intellectual elites. There's no morons speaking on Twitter. Give me a break. And because Twitter is a news feed, that also gives it some importance. Facebook, used to be just a tirade of... they're all narcissistic, but it was more like cries of distress. Or like, look at me, let me just throw my business on the internet. Whereas Twitter was... a lot of people use it as a news feed, in fact. We'll go for the data, 74% of people use Twitter to get news. That is why journalists bloody love it. Most journalists are getting their news from Twitter. But the thing is, it is good to have a platform where you can get a news feed that's away from the idiot box and the rags, but the news is only as good as the source it came from. And what sources are we getting it from? That's the thing, you're getting bad sources, and then you had journalists who journalists used to go out and get news and interview people, but now they don't need to. They just look at Twitter, which is occupied by only a certain type of person, and they go, well, here's the news, and this is how everyone feels about it. No, because there's only a certain type of people that use Twitter. Okay, so I think 74% of people use it to get news. That's a problem. Journalists are very active. Journalists make up 25% of verified accounts. 25% of verified accounts. You notice the problems with journalism? Journalism's always been a bit iffy, in my view. But most people can agree now that it's gotten iffier. It's trash. It's garbage. It's rubbish. It's bin meat. 25% of verified accounts are journalists on Twitter. It's an ecosystem of echo chamber nonsense. Now check this out. 330 million people, roughly, worldwide, are active users. 63% of them are between 35 and 65. 34% are female and 66% are male. Only 40% of Twitter users log in daily, and something like 40% of users have never sent a single tweet in their life. 40%. So as you sort of work out all the numbers, the people who are most active on Twitter, aren't like the general public. I think you can agree there. So, the point is, one of the main points is this. There's only a certain type of person who is very vocal on Twitter, and their voices get amplified. And because journalists just live in the Twitter landscape and don't bother going out into the real world and talking to Joe and Jane Average, like there's no vox popping, there's no standing on the street going, "Hello, what do you think about the war? I think it's awful and I work at the market." Now it's just going through a Twitter feed of all very similar people. It's just similar. Facebook is the masses, right? Twitter is not the masses. And yet, to gauge how the masses feel, they go to Twitter because that's what they love. And this is why you would never see things coming. This is why they never saw the landslide victory come for the Conservative Party, because Twitter is inhabited by very loud voices who are very left-wing. You could go through, and Facebook was kind of the same, you can go through these timelines and just, if you were a pollster, like if you were just gathering data just from Twitter, you would have a very skewed view of the world. It would not match up to what actually happens. You know what I mean? If you were a betting person and saying, well, let's see what Twitter's saying, and then you made a bet on the election results, you'd fucking lose. And you'd lose big. You'd lose big. Twitter is not like the rest. It's not the masses. The masses is what makes society. This is why they talk about the silent majority, not because they've been silenced. Shush, silent majority. It's just because they don't feel the need to yap. They feel that just voting is enough, which it isn't. But it's enough for them to cause a stink. I mean, we left Europe. That was enough. I mean, that was enough to... look all the chaos that created in people's brains. That drove people insane. That was enough for them. Do you see what I'm saying? They don't need to be gobbing off all the time. Those that remain quiet will always start a riot. That's from The Chronic, 1992. I ain't wrong about this. It's not reflective of society, and yet it is always used as a go-to by journalists. You know, there's harassment. When they talk about harassment, whether it's a movie star or a singer, and they say, "Look at all this harassment. Look at all this racism that's going around," and it's like some clearly bot account that's got 22 followers, and the account's been about for about 5 days. Go, look what they said to Kelly Marie Tran. They're being proper racialists, and it's just like some nobody. Even if it is a real person or not, we don't even know. But they always go to Twitter as if this gauges how society is functioning, how society is feeling. And it's so way off. It's completely off. And yet, it is dictating so much. Angry voices on Twitter get outraged about this, want to cancel this, and everyone bows down to it. Why? This is not society. If everyone on Facebook went on a rampage about something, as if Facebook was as loud as Twitter, then Christ, they'd weld the Channel Tunnel shut. They'd have RPGs at Dover waiting for migrant boats. I mean, let's face facts. But that's not happening, is it? Because no one's listening to Facebook. So, basically, in early 2016, just before the big bad orange man brought Nazism to planet Earth, there was a leak. I'm consulting the notes here, okay? There was a leak that Twitter would change its timeline into an algorithmic timeline. So tweets would no longer appear in order. Instead, only tweets selected by the new opaque software program, right? So this was following a similar algorithm to Facebook. I mean, the thing is about all these social media companies is they do just rip off each other Like they'll just Snapchat comes along and then Instagram and Twitter and Facebook are like going, oh, let's steal all that. Clubhouse has come along, and what does Mark Zuckerberg do? Well, we need a Clubhouse feature. He just stealing all the time. These people they're just tiresome. Anyway, so people weren't too happy about it back then. But the thing is, it went unnoticed. Like many things that get implemented online, you don't notice. Like when eBay, remember eBay used to be yellow? I'm pretty sure it was yellow, right? The whole interface was yellow. And then they changed it to white, and people freaked out. They're like, oh my God, it's white. Like they really freaked out. So what did they do? They changed it back to yellow, but then they changed it shade by shade, pixel by pixel by pixel, from yellow to white, and you didn't notice it happened. Oh yeah. You may not like change, but if you implement change slowly, you won't notice it happened. Huh? Think about that next time you're complaining about your freedoms. I won't go. So it's basically designed. The design of it was to keep you engaged. It's to keep you on the platform. It's like drugs. You give out testers. You keep people hooked. Like, this is why hard drugs make you a lot of money. It's not like selling acid or speed. Well, speed, people can get addicted to speed, but like proper addictive substances are great for selling. Why? Because like you have a loyal custom base. A custom base that will suck someone off behind a bin. Do you know what I mean? They'll rob houses for this stuff. And they keep coming back for more and more and more. They're hooked. Alright? If you've worked in the drug game, if you sold addictive substances, or you've been into addictive substances, you know the game that's being played on a global scale. You don't need to go stand on some dodgy corner at 2 a.m. waiting for some weirdo packing a gun, spitting rocks into your hand that you wipe off with a towel and then stick it in your mouth. It just comes through here. Think about that. And then in that time, over the last 10 years, the power of outrage has become huge. News outlets were dying, and then they discovered that people were really addicted to outrage culture. Outrage clickbait was huge. Police brutality videos became really big during the turn of the decade into the 2010s. Starting off with Trayvon Martin, onto Eric Garner, onto Michael Brown. These people were addicted to this stuff. This was the news cycle of outrage. People are addicted to outrage. I've gone over this many times. You can look from a back catalogue. Please do. So, you have this mixture of journalism that is dying and losing its sense of value and losing its values, that loves Twitter. You have an algorithm that makes people addicted to content that they can't look away from. Because you can't look away from stuff. This is why the Saw films were popular, because you don't like looking at it, but you can't look away from the terror. You ever seen those real clickbait links that you'll click on, especially a lot of them are on Facebook, and you'll go onto some article that keeps going through pages and pages and pages, and then you'll see these boxes of photographs of just gross stuff, like weird hairs growing out of elbows with snot on it, and and worms coming out of people's eyes, and really horrible close-ups of acne, and you're just like, ugh, but you can't look away from it. That's like what the entirety of Twitter is. So, the media landscape is dying. Old new media needs a way to stay afloat. Donald Trump comes along after, outrage culture has become the only way for them to get clicks. And then Donald Trump becomes the entire media ecosystem for 4 years. Donald Trump, big on Twitter. Huge on Twitter. Now, we'll get to even more about Donald Trump. And in that time, you can look at graphs about the gap of polarization. and how it is, and the loudest, most aggressive and angry, shouty voices are elevated to the top on both sides, left and right. The algorithm has allowed this to happen, and therefore, like I said, not your average Joe and Jane average. There's a certain type of person on Twitter that shouts a lot, and those people are the loudest and most listened to voices. Now you have policy implemented because of these loud fringe voices, the loudest, most deranged, and clearly mentally unstable. Because you can also look at other stuff. Look at what Jonathan Haidt talks about. It's very interesting. And I talked about this on the last podcast. How young women especially, their anxiety is going up and up and up and up and up. This is all linked together. You have people who are addicted to social media. They cannot get away from outrage culture. They cannot look away from rage bait. It enrages them. They are experiencing anxiety. They are upset. They shout and shout about it. And the journalists are addicted to Twitter themselves. And they think that that is how the entire population feels, when actually all they're doing is amplifying the voices of very damaged and upset people. Damaged and upset because of the culture of social media and the algorithm that has gotten them addicted to this stuff. The algorithm has destroyed their mind. So look at the polarization, the gap between left and right, okay. The algorithm keeps you inside basically it's a social media safe space for you, because you will only get told and shown the stuff that the machine, the robot, the bots, the Skynet thinks that you like, but you only like it because of psychology. You can't look away from it. If you kept showing people just other stuff and other stuff, if it was just mundane stuff, I mean, there's a lot of people who are into some very mundane stuff. There's people who look at pictures of kittens for hours on end. Fluffy kittens, fluffy kittens. If you kept showing people fluffy kittens and fluffy kittens, they just look at fluffy kittens. But this is dictating to people, this is reflecting the worst of the worst of the worst. And you're kept in an echo chamber of terror, of outrage. You're only hearing what you want to hear, because the robot says, you like hearing that, here's some more of it, here's some more of it. And then they have the nerve to ban QAnon on it when they know that the algorithm is probably responsible for the majority of the mindset of QAnon. And now these poor schlubs are being labelled as terrorists. I mean, Jesus, talk about, is that not a bit of a piss take? Flat Earth? Flat Earth? Do you think Flat Earth would be so big out here if it wasn't for these algorithms going, you like Flat Earth? There'd be no such thing as confirmation bias. I mean, there would be, but like echo chambers and confirmation bias are all part of the symptoms. We are experiencing a mental health pandemic, and it's been going on for a very long time. And instead of people being adult about it and saying, I don't think that people on Twitter represent the entire nation, they just listen to these really loud voices. Why? Because journalists, the elitist journalists, prop up these voices because they think that Twitter is the Bible when it comes to what people think and what is right and what is true. And it's completely disconnected from the rest of society. There's piss all people on Twitter. And the people who are on Twitter aren't even that active. And the people that are active, the people that listen to, are not right in the head. End of story. And yet, look at how much power it has. It keeps conditioning people. It rewards the worst kind of behavior. It rewards the worst. When your brain's going, like, I could rant and rage on Twitter all day long. Easy. And then I'd be a big voice out there. And you can see it, look, as a great example, Trump derangement syndrome. I used to follow this woman who was a writer, and she just spent every day tweeting at Donald Trump and replying to everything he said for hours on end, as if he was listening. I mean, since he's gone, she must, I don't know, What's she doing now? Baking cakes? Like, they just couldn't get enough of it. That's why he had so many followers. Donald Trump didn't... Everyone who followed Donald Trump didn't like him. They followed him because they just wanted to be outraged on a daily basis and shouting, going, "You will hear me!" Trump derangement syndrome is a toxic... Well, obviously it's toxic. Sorry, I'm losing words. Maybe I've got Alzheimer's. But it's a toxic outcome of this outrage algorithm, I suppose. You know, it's a result of all this, because, I mean, look, now Trump's gone, the media landscape is completely lost. They don't even know what to talk about now. They're just like, what do we do now? They're in bad shape. And clearly, with how many people are experiencing levels of anxiety, how many people are, you know, going into what is real anxiety and what is, like, you know, what you think is anxiety, because probably a lot of people do self-diagnose, but there's clearly a lot of people who are not okay now because of this. And Twitter is one of the biggest harmers out there. It really is. You can have a go at Instagram about how it promotes, you know, this vacuous lifestyle. Like, look at me with all my money and my Photoshop body, blah, blah, blah. That's a discussion for a different time. But it doesn't have the power. Twitter wields so much power. You can create a completely false narrative from looking through Twitter. You can say a reaction to anything. You can say, right, we're going to bomb Iran. What does Twitter think about this? And you can pick and choose, because Twitter's like the greatest place on planet Earth, according to journalists, going, well, all of these progressives think that it's a good idea, so therefore the general population think it's a great idea. Let's bomb the crap out of Iran. When it's completely false to how people feel. It's a completely constructive reality coming from Twitter, and journalists are to blame for it. But how else does Twitter have power? Why else is it? It's not just about people's outrage and about, you know, they're saying we need to ban this word from the English language because 4 people with blue check marks said so. It's not just even about that. Trump himself continuously manipulated the stock market from tweeting. Now that is some shit, okay? I mean, first of all, look. So in 2016, he tweeted about Lockheed Martin's cost overruns. And he said, the F-35 program and cost is out of control. Billions of dollars can and will be saved on military and other purchases after January 20th. This reduced their stock by up to 5%. One study showed that days when Trump tweeted more than 35 times, he tweeted a lot, didn't he? Jesus. On days when he tweeted more than 35 times, it coincided with negative returns for the S&P 500. While stocks rose on days when Trump tweeted less than 5 times. Trump could literally just tweet, economy's doing real strong, and the S&P would go, woo! Every time Trump was tweeting, stuff was happening. Trump completely manipulated the media landscape for 4 years because he knew that they couldn't help themselves. There was hardly any reactions to, well, there was reactions to what he said on television, but when it came to Twitter, it was a shit show. He could manipulate entire news organizations into doing what he wanted them to do, even though they're all going against him. Now, obviously, with all the shit they threw at him and the narrative of him being a Nazi and all this stuff, like, maybe didn't help him in the end. But for the most part, he would never have come to power if the media landscape hadn't been addicted to this outrage culture. And he played them like a fiddle for years. Why do you think they banned it? And then they banned him. Why do you think they banned him when he was out of office? He was no longer useful for the Twitter machine. He was no longer useful for the journalists because now he's not in power anymore, even though he kind of was useful for them because they would be dead in the water, let's put it like that. But by banning him, they really, really shook things up. And it really changed everything. It's like the world is completely different now. Not just because he's not in power, but because he's not on Twitter. It's very rare to hear from him. He used to hit he was tweeting more than 35 times a day. They loved him being on there when he was useful. You don't have to be Donald Trump. Look Kylie Jenner. You remember when Kylie Jenner tweeted just about Snapchat? And what did she say? So, does anyone else not open Snapchat anymore, or is it just me? This is so sad. That lost Snapchat about $1 billion. From what? Kylie Jenner going, I don't open Snapchat anymore. Lost $1 billion. If the stock market can be that volatile because of the words of one vacuous person, okay, what's the similarities between Kylie Jenner and Trump? Well, they clearly bloody love themselves a hell of a lot. They are the embodiment of what social media represents. I love myself and you must love me too. For someone to be able to just say that and a stock lose $1 billion. If she said that on Facebook, no one would care. And no one's going to care. This is my point, okay? Like, that from one tweet, you can lose a company $1 billion. Not just a company, the people who invested. 6% in one day lost because of one tweet. Donald Trump go, oil! It's rubbish! Oil goes down. Twitter dictates too much policy. People look at Twitter too much. And too many decisions are made on it. And another great example is recently with Elon Musk gets it too. Elon Musk and cryptocurrency. He tweets about Dogecoin. Dogecoin was just a meme, a joke. Well, now a lot of people are investing in Doge. The price has gone up. Even the guy that invented Doge is like, I just don't get it. He tweets about Bitcoin. The price is skyrocketed on a couple of occasions. You can check the charts and you can do all the measurements and you can look at the news and look at the developments in crypto and in blockchain. You can do all this kind of analysis. But well and truly, you have to be just waiting for that Elon Musk tweet because it has been pumping the price up just from tweeting. Now think about that. He ain't sending out a Facebook post. It ain't on Instagram. It's on Twitter. That makes it... You see, people look at Twitter and make too many decisions based on people on Twitter. Elon Musk is a great guy. He's a meme lord. All right? He loves memes. Okay? But when memes are getting people into the White House, when memes are, boosting and crashing stocks, when the reaction to memes are changing laws, when journalists are pumping out news because they are so desperate for clicks that it's actually affecting millions of people's mental health. This makes the whole thing a fucking problem. It's a problem. There are, bad relationships can give you mental health problems, okay? Financial ruin can give you mental health problems. There's many things out there that can affect your soft, mushy brain. For the bad, for the worst, there are many things that can make you mentally unstable. Okay, why add to it? Why add this into the mix? Do you know what I mean? Twitter has too much power. And we haven't even got into the fact of their bias, obviously, that they really do pick and choose what they consider to be bad talk and what they consider to be against their terms of service. But that's kind of all social media programs, platforms. I mean, that's everything. That's from YouTube to Facebook to Instagram to Twitch. Like, they really do pick and choose. You're in a constant state of confusion about what you can and can't do. That's part of their game. You're not supposed to understand what's going on. It's supposed to be confusing. Keeps you on your toes. So, we could go into that about Twitter and how, Because there'll be conservatives out there going, they're treating conservatives real bad. And it's like, okay, I get it. Everyone gets it. Okay, everyone gets it. But they all do it. So we can't just put that on Twitter. But Twitter has it has too much influence and power. Same way as Google. Google and Twitter are in need of some sort of regulation. They need to be like piped down. I mean, look at Twitter when they ban Donald Trump and they say we cannot be. This is making people riot and influencing bad decisions and blah 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 whatever. But then when where was it? Was it in India? When they were like, nah, Twitter. Was it India? I can't remember what country. It was recent. Or was it somewhere in Africa? I think it was Africa. The Indian elections already happened. Where was it Tanzania? I can't remember. Sorry. But they were like, nah, we're blocking Twitter here. And they're like, oh, what are you blocking us for? This is against freedom of speech and expression. And they're like, Twitter's having a negative influence on the elections. And they're like, no, you can't do that. We're Twitter. Don't you know who we are? See? I don't like it when it's done to them. But that's not what it's all about anyway. As soon as it happens to you, you don't like it. All right, maybe we should go back to the Bible. Because all I remember about the Bible is do unto others as you want done unto yourself, or whatever it says. Like, it's pretty good, isn't it? Isn't that a good way to go about your life? None of these motherfuckers go about their lives in that way. No one has those values. Out the window. These Silicon Valley people are degenerates. They are. Twitter's got to go. It's got too much power and influence. And it's not entirely Twitter's fault, but it's journalists and the elitists who went on there and claimed it as their own. It's their space. Too many journalists on there doing bad work, just looking at Twitter as if this is the way the wind's blowing. Whereas Twitter themselves and Facebook, I mean, who started off this algorithm thing? Well, it was Facebook. I mean, they are the worst offenders. But, they didn't look at it and go, now, would there be anything bad about this? To not conduct any sort of studies into how this is affecting people's mental health, or not to even think about the adverse reaction, the adverse effects of what these algorithms might do to people, is completely irresponsible. It just shows that, these people who harp on about justice and truth and helping people, all this nonsense, these people are pieces of crap. That all they believe in is stock. Okay. At one point, maybe they did believe in the message, bringing people together. Well, that's gone out the window. Same way as MPs used to represent the people. Now they just suppress us. Okay. Everyone's lost their way. And I say, fuck them. There is a way, we don't need Twitter. If it's gone, you will miss it. But I don't think it will have I don't think anything bad will come of it not being there. We can go back to having forums and niche places. Everyone's like, oh, we're getting banned off Twitter. It's like, you've given Twitter too much importance. And they can ban, and they can, they don't have to follow the rules of whatever the First Amendment's rights, or whatever the amendment is, the Second Amendment, whatever the free speech one is. They don't have to follow that. And because governments know that Twitter doesn't have to follow the constitutions that government does, and they know how powerful it is and how influential it is, then they can use that to their own advantage. Because saying, we're not suppressing anybody. That's Twitter. That's a private company. They can do what they like. And a lot of people said this is the public town square of where discourse happens. This is where journalists look to stick their finger in the air and tell you where the wind is blowing, even though it's not blowing anywhere near where they say it's blowing, because Twitter is full of just people who like to be on Twitter, which is these elitist weirdo types. Governments are playing a very, very weird game where they're like, yeah, we can suppress as much as we like, because everyone looks to Twitter as where to get news and information and truth from. That is why it's a problem. And it's making people crazy at the same time. It's got to go. It's got to go. Then if we all go off into our little forums, it's like, oh, there's no place for comedy on Twitter. Well, create a comedy forum. I'll do it. Let's go back to forums where we can all just hang out with like-minded people who ain't crazy. Say, well, you know what you're getting into when you come into this forum? We ourselves have given it too much credibility and too much attention. It's time for you to wean yourself off it. Even if you're not on it, you're still addicted to it. You're still giving it power. Anytime you see an article, if you see anything about Twitter mentioned in there, a tweet by whoever, don't read it and tell other people not to read it. Don't listen to anything that comes off Twitter. Ban it from your life. It's got to go. It's got to be taken down. These overlords need to know what time it is, and it's called bye-bye time. We don't need it. It's got to go. There's too much power, and people are using this power for bad, naughty, unjust reasons. Well, I hope I've put across, like I said, I might not have argued the case as good as someone else could have. But go do the research. Go look into it. There's so much awful stuff. Oh, look what it's doing to people's brains. Anyway, if you like that kind of thing, it's a pleasure to have you here. Like I said, if you are seeing this on the website and you haven't subscribed, then you should, because that's great. But another great way is there are push notifications. I know push notifications, we're like, oh, it's very intrusive. But, it's better than subscribing on something and clicking a bell notification, to be honest. I mean, I don't bombard the website with content. You'll get notifications when something new comes up. I just think it's the best way. Emailing, I like you to be on the email list, but not everyone opens emails. But subscribing will just... subscribing and pushing that notification on the website will give you up-to-date access. Like I said, I won't bombard you, and I won't mess with your day. I'm not a Silicon Valley lunatic. Okay, it's just the best way to be connected. Like I said, we don't need these platforms no more. If you like someone, then you can go to their platform. This is the future. Maybe I'll be creating a platform where we can, all like-minded people, can be a portal for everyone. If you like having everything in one space, then maybe that can be done. Support the future. Like me. And if you're already subscribed and all that stuff, well, good for you. You are going to have beautiful and healthy babies. Okay, and if you don't like this, I don't care.